From the United Nations Office to the African Union, this is She Stands for Peace. I am Dr. Yemisi Akimbobola, and in this podcast, I speak with thought leaders and peace builders who share their reflections and best practices towards achieving objectives of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda in Africa. In this episode, Editar Adhiambo Ochieng, founder of the Feminist for Peace, Rights and Justice Center, joins me from Kibra in Kenya, and we talk about peace building in informal settlements. Now, a warning for this episode, Edita does share details of her experience of sexual violence. Editar Ochieng, it's a pleasure to speak with you today. Now, you founded the Feminist for Peace, Rights and Justice Center to build leadership among young women and to be a platform for multi-generational organizing and networking. Both the women, peace and security and the youth peace and security agendas that you work with, and you have spoken of taking a feminist approach to implementing US SCR 1325. Now, your work is in Kibera in Kenya, what is known as the largest informal settlement in Africa and home to about 250,000 people. So, within your context there in Kibera, what does a feminist approach to 1325 mean to you?
So thank you so much for having me here. I want to take this opportunity to appreciate your time and also just to share my experiences from grassroots, where I work from in Kibera on matters of women, peace and security, youth peace and security, thank you, and feminist leadership. So for us, it's very important look using feminist approach to advocate for women issues, especially on women, peace and security agenda. Because where I come from, women were not involved actively on matters of peace building. And most of the time, when communities are burning, the people who are around home at that time are women. So we started questioning our peace committees in Kibera and asking them they need to include women in the processes, especially young women also who have been excluded in these processes for the longest time. Right now in Kibera, we'll say the Peace Committee Nyumba Kumi initiative has really included women and also included young women in these processes. And a lot of work of promoting women peace and security and youth peace and security right now in Kibra is super, super great.
Let's move on now to the elections, and because Kenya just completed its current election process. So ahead of this year's election, there were several peace focused activities organized to bring communities together in Kibera. So tell us what happens when a place like Kibera experiences violent conflict, especially during elections, and what impact have you seen it has had on the women in that community?
So in 2022, elections in Kenya was quite peaceful. That is what I will say, compared to the other years, 2017, 2013, and it was really extreme in 2007. So election in Kenya is between life and death, and election is in Kenya, it's a business, it's a big business, and everyone is active for their candidate to be elected. So having post-election violence in 2007, you may see so many women were affected in Kibera. Looking at how Kibera is, the location of Kibera, and how Kibera was vulnerable, and most of us are not empowered to some level. Most of us are illiterate, and it was a very difficult time, especially for women. Women were literally killed by the police and even the community because this was a battle between the men, let me say in quotes, and the police. And when police arrived in Kibera, they were throwing bullets everywhere. And believe me, women, this bullet found women at home and they were killed. So many cases were reported of gender-based violence and sexual and gender-based violence. And what some of my closest friends were gang raped by the soldiers who were supposed uh, to be protecting the community, the civilians during war or conflict. So a lot of things happened, the killing of women and sexually violating of women, and even women didn't get their it was really difficult for women to get their livelihood, like the basic needs and some of the things that we need as women. um, at that time, if you are sick, you couldn't even go to the hospital because there were fights everywhere, killings everywhere. And then post-election violence in Kenya and my experience in Kenya, it was really worse. This is something that it was the first time for me because I was young seeing such experience, and it promoted hatred, it promoted extremism at some level in our communities. And afterwards, when Kofi Annan came to Kenya, it was a bit peaceful because there was a coalition uh, agreement by the government, and things came to be peaceful.
Hmm. And in 2019, you vied for the Kibera parliamentary seat under the Ukweli party. How different are the security concerns for female political aspirants compared to their male counterparts? And what impact have you seen this had on the participation of women and young women in politics in Kenya?
So first of all, um, I want to take again this opportunity because getting into politics at 30 years old in 2019 was a lesson for me after our member of parliament died. And he was somebody who was close to our hearts. And also, he was somebody who was advocating and an activist in my community. So when he passed on, we were looking at then who was going to take the next um, who was going to be the next member of parliament in Kibra constituency. So when I realized there were no women, I took my courage and got into the space, which was really difficult because it was a really patriarchal space. As a young woman, it was really challenging because from lack of support, financial support, insecurities, those were the main challenge. But the insecurity really wasn't because campaigning as a woman, you will be insulted every day, you will be threatened every single day, and not only you as an individual who is campaigning or a candidate, but also your voter. So it means during voting time, women who are supporting you will stay at home because of the extreme threats. But also, at the same time, as much as I experienced all these things, most of the people in my community supported my candidature and really given me their time. They were given me, some of them given me their money, and I was able to hire security personnel to look after my security and also my children. Because as a young woman, you have your children and you're getting into politics, then anything can happen to your family. Because at some point, there is this guy who has been bullying the community, and for me, he's a perpetrator. When I was coming from campaign, I saw him talking to my daughter, and my daughter is very young, so naive, and I was really shocked. And this time, something crossed into my mind, and I had to take security issues very, very serious. And before that, I had a case whereby a man stripped a young woman because they wore a political t-shirt, a political t-shirt from a different political parties, where they were pushing in Kebera for people to participate. And then, after stripping this young woman naked, we were in this case trying to get justice. And then, when I was coming home at around 12 midnight, three people were following me, and those three people threatened me. And they said if I was going to continue with this case, then I'm going to sing. And at that time, the only thing that came into my mind were my children, because I was looking at how my children are vulnerable in that community where so many people have normalized violence against women, and I had to withdraw the case because of my children. So politics is not a joke in African countries. And if we are talking about women, peace, and security, one of the greatest pillar talks about participation. How then do we involve women in policy making processes? We can only involve women in policy making processes if we have a conducive environment, a friendly environment where women will sell their manifesto, women will stand with their manifesto and work for the community after elections.
Mm. So, so I want to dig a bit more into the question that you've posed there. What was done differently for this recently passed election to make the elections more accessible to women, both in terms of women as aspirants and women performing their civic rights, despite of all the dangers that you highlighted there? What did you do differently in 2022 to avoid what happened in 2027, 2017, 2019? Because this year there were more women elected than previously.
So, first of all, I want to thank everyone who participated in the absentia. So many people came together. People built consortium, people built collaboration, and people really invested on women leadership in this 2022 everywhere in the country. And I want also to congratulate the elected leaders who are women. And that was a great work because of the efforts, again, of the grassroots women and other women and even global communities who really invested their money and their time, also creating awareness that women leadership is really important and it's a way to go. So, Kenya, we are a bit privileged enough comparing ourselves with 2019, 2017 again and 2013. At least we increased the number of women who participated in politics in 2022. And what happened? A peace building initiative came together and make it possible for these women by building an enabling environment, an environment where women will walk anywhere and sell their manifesto. Despite the challenges that women faced in 2022 can never be compared with the challenges that has been existing because the communities also came together because they felt there was a need of coming together, looking or having the case studies of what happened in 2017 and 2007. And more so, women. Women didn't want to experience the same thing that has been happening in the countries. So at their cocoon, in the market, women were talking about yes, we need elections in 2022, and again, we need peaceful elections. And also at community level, coming up with community manifesto, peace manifesto is something that helped because we called upon different aspirants to sign the peace charter to ensure that when they're campaigning in our communities, then they need to leave our communities as peaceful the way they found and even at a better condition, not coming and harming our communities. And this is something that really helped us. Again, different trainings that has been happening in the community, training people like us. We worked with Life and Peace Institute, and for us, our approach was quite different because we allowed ourselves to work with people who have been criminalized in the community, people who have been involved in crime, people who have been involved in violence. And for this was a transformation because when you allow them in peace building processes, they know what it means to have a peaceful community.
So when you reflect on the things that worked this year and also the things that didn't work, what would you like to see in place ahead of the next elections in terms of safety for women to participate in civic life, especially when we consider the impact of injury on their ability to vote, for example?
So for me, with the cases that were reported of gender-based violence and looking at this beautiful concept that we have of women, peace, and security, and just reflecting back on protection pillar and making the government accountable and just reminding their government that it is their mandate to protect civilians, especially women and young people in different countries. And Kenya is a signatory to Women, Peace and Security. So the reported cases that we had, first of all, we realized that women who are armed or women who experience gender-based violence and sexual and gender-based violence, it was difficult for them to exercise their democratic rights. They didn't vote on 8th August because on 9th August 2022 because they were dealing with they were nursing their wounds, they were dealing with different issues. And some of the women, we had to refer them from Kibera to other safe or shelters in different areas so that they could recover. So in future, I would love the government to ensure, and anyone, because I cannot call upon the government, but everyone from individual level in collective, we need to ensure that the communities are safer for women, because looking at our traditional method, our traditional way of lifestyle, men decided for women to vote. And that if that will be the case in 2027, and maybe it was also the case in 2022, that contributed to violence at home, then we need to ensure that we create awareness for people to understand a democratic right is not um, uh, it's not collective. Yes, at some level it's collective when we're speaking about collective, but it starts at individual level. When I make decision as a woman that the person I'm going to vote to, then my partner needs to respect my democratic rights. And you get that that has not been in the case at the grassroots level, because our partners would propose or would command the person that women will vote to. So creation of awareness. And I was just talking to different UN entities. If in 2022 will be so important for women to have their own queue, because some of the women also experience sexual harassment when you are queuing, because you queue men, 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 women. And that makes it difficult because some men take advantage of that and they sexually harass women on the queue. So when we want also election that has no issues, it's peaceful, but also an election that respects the rights of women and also the men, we need to be so inclusive deliberately, involving also people with disability, women with disability, and giving them a space, an enabling environment to come and exercise their democratic rights. And continue preaching the doing peace activities at grassroots level, engaging leaders, and making also the leaders that we've chosen in 2022. So when it comes to 2027 or in future, we have elections that are really credible, elections that are peaceful, and elections that are fair, but also elections that understand that to that gender rule, it is something that is very important and it is constitutional.
I want to dig more into life, for women in the community beyond the electoral violence, because Kibera faces a lot more than electoral violence. You have talked about the plight of single young women and mothers in Kibera whose partners are killed or join militia groups, for example. So, how have you been supporting these women, and what are the areas in which you would like more support from the international women, peace, and security community?
For us at Feminist Center, we are a community-based organization that understand what is the need on the ground with the women that we work for with. We bring these women on the table, and we've used a resilience toolkit. Resilience toolkit is a toolkit that gives the world hope, is a toolkit that also help in personal reflection and gives an individual power to transform. So bring using the resilience toolkit, we've been able to hear their stories. And when you hear different stories, it is also a process of healing and also finding alternatives to bring positive impact in the communities. So these young women that we work with in the community, young women who have lost their partners, we involve them in different way. And for us, one of the biggest way and a strategy that we have is to ensure that also they're economically empowered. How then do we train them on how to make extra money, do their own savings, and also having positive parenthood? Because when you're young and you're raising a kid alone with the community, the kind of the community that we come from, it is also difficult. Then how do we integrate, leverage resources, talking to different people, linking these young girls with resources, government opportunities that are available, like taking loans, applying for grants, to ensure that they are busy and working as a team. So again, on a human right perspective, also just ensuring that they understand their human rights. So in Kenya, what is happening? most of the people from the grassroots don't understand about their constitutional rights. And extrajudicial killings is against the law. So people at the community level needs to understand the concept of legal framework. Where do they have their rights and what is the limitation? And this is something that has been are really helpful, especially in making a conducive environment and promoting peace building in the community. Because when you understand the rights, you'll also understand the limitation of your rights, and you're not going to do anything negative in the community or harm the community.
You've spoken publicly about your experience of rape at a young age of 6, and then later on again when you were a teenager, and how you've used these experiences to speak up about sexual violence because this is a regular reality for a lot of women in your community. So, sexual and gender based violence is one of the key aspects of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. So, reflecting on how you have used your experiences to advocate for other women, what would you like to see organizations like the United Nations, like the African Union, your governments, national governments, and other key stakeholders, what would you like to see them do better to empower or to better empower survivors of conflict related sexual violence?
So for me, I want to appreciate their work because I know it is really difficult to work in the world or a very retrogressive community where which most of the time the communities are like that, and a patriarchal community that believe that a community needs to be run in a certain way by harming women. I'll just share my story a little bit if you'll allow me. When I was 6 years old, I was defiled, which is still rape. And then when I was 16 years old, I was gang raped, and having so many, experiencing different issues as a young girl. And it was not easy afterwards. Um, and for me, I felt that the rapists were shattering my dreams because they were taking power away from me. I realized perpetrators take the power of women when they sexually violate women. And the community, again, is not a conducive space for women who have been sexually abused. When the perpetrator takes the power from you, the, this is what happened to me. They went back to the community and started telling everyone in the community that uh, they had sex with me. And for me, that was a gang rape because there were three men that I knew. One of them, my closest relative, and the other two were neighbors in the community, and we grew up together. And it was a really very painful experience because at that time, Kibra was really green, and we didn't have anywhere to report these cases, and I was not empowered enough even to speak about that issue. For the longest time, I was really quiet, and I believe that when I was quiet, I gave them power to continue oppressing more women, power to continue abusing more women, because that has been the strategy of the perpetrators. When you are silent, they keep on doing the same thing to other people. They keep on harming the communities because of the silence uh, that might affect the survivors. So, looking at that, and also in 2007, we realized that after post election violence, so many young women and girls were again violated. So when we started our survivors dialogue, when we were sharing our stories and getting just an opportunity to ease ourselves by sharing our stories, it was also a way of us to heal, and it was also a way for us to get angry and stop the perpetrators. So we came together, we founded Kibira Young Women Network, and we said we are stopping this monster. This monster was killing a lot of people, a lot of women. This monster was even taking advantage of the young boys in the community. So getting into this space, we really agitated. because we wanted immediate change. We didn't realize that change is a process because by that time we were really young and we're really aspiring for the immediate change. So we realized it was a bit difficult, and we took our time to educate ourselves on how do we prevent gender-based violence and sexual gender-based violence in our communities. How do we respond to gender-based violence and sexual gender-based violence? We came up together, and right now we have women in our communities, and this initiative has been supported by UNFPA on economically empowering women in my community, and in that group are making soap for them to get extra money and survive as a way of preventing and responding to gender-based violence in our communities.
Mm. And just to also look at some other of your activities in the community, because you set up a feminist library as part of your peace building efforts. So tell us more about this and the impact and role of such activities, especially when we think about examples of how to localize efforts to achieve the women, peace, and security agenda in communities like Kibra.
So we came up with a small library, and we're really advocating for women books, books that are women are the authors, and books that will inspire African young girl. So that is what we've been looking for, and books that will also motivate these young girls and also connect these young girls to the faces of women who have done things in the communities. The documentaries of women who have done matters of women, peace and security, human rights, environment issues, as we integrate all these issues. So these young girls, when they grow up, they realize that women have been making efforts to make our communities better. Because in our generation, we lacked that. We lacked to connect with some women who was doing something in the community, because women's stories are not documented well. Women's stories are not visual. So how do we make in our library women's stories to be visual and also memorable? So when these girls are growing up, they grow up emulating women work, and also for us it is a way of bridging intergenerational gap that has been existing.
To finish our conversation of today, if there was one action you'd like our listeners to take today in relation to everything that we've talked about, what would that be?
I'll just urge the world, let us come together in collective, because peace starts with me as an individual. As we spread to the world, we need peace in the world for women to develop.
Thank you, editor. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you for listening to She Stands for Peace, a podcast series where thought leaders and peace builders share their reflections and best practices in the women, peace, and security agenda in Africa. I am Dr. Yemsi Akimbobola, and this podcast was produced by the United Nations Office to the African Union with the generous support of the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Don't forget to join the conversation using the hashtag She Stands for Peace.